Hey everyone, Dr. Pete here. Welcome to the 5 days of focus, recovery, and reconnection program. It's great that you're here. So let's get started together with module one. Why am I like this? Why am I like this? Now, of course, you already have a very clear answer to that at some levels, but as a psychologist myself, the work I do with my clients, it's often good to pause and take a proper, holistic view, a more thorough view of all the different reasons you might be like this at the moment. And so if we think about the work in this section, I'm going to share with you for 10 minutes or so about what is burnout, why we might be actually more amazing than we feel right now, and then the causes of burnout, thinking of these big events, the background things that just drive us, and introduce this idea of little t and big T trauma. Then we'll move into practice and apply these things into our lives at a deeper level. So let's begin the in focus part of module one. Why am I like this? Burnout, of course, look, as a term, it's a tricky one. It's, as you can see, a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion with accompanying lowered productivity, lowered energy, feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, frustration, and worry. And that's quite a broad description. And I'm sure in your experience of burnout, and certainly in mine, I can relate to this. I can relate to this very well, very well. Now, what's interesting about this, though, is that this definition is so broad and generic, and we use it indiscriminately to describe depression, anxiety, and stress conditions. And so, even the term burnout can be a little confusing when you're thinking about what's going on inside you. And so, if we think about this more, if I put my clinical psychology hat on, depression is the condition that's really got that low mood or anhedonia, just that exhaustion and that retreat from life, loss of interest in normal activities, weight gain or weight loss, sleep disturbance, agitation, low energy, fatigue, not able to concentrate. Anxiety is, again, that tense state, that worry, that rapid heartbeat, sleep disturbance, poor attention, agitation, a list of symptoms there. And of course, stress is differentiated again by the muscle aches and pains and the nervous habits that come when we're stressed. Now, if you're listening to this, you can just hear what I've said, but if you're watching the video recording of this, what you'll notice with all these lists of symptoms on the screen is that all three conditions, depression, anxiety, and stress, have four common symptoms across them, which is sleep disturbance, irritability, low energy, and problems with attention and concentration. And so when I'm working with my clients as a psychologist, one of the first things we have to kind of come to grips with is we could be experiencing depression, anxiety, and stress symptoms all at the same time. And that doesn't necessarily mean we have to have multiple diagnoses placed upon us. That's the kind of medical specialist part of the world. But what I do find really helpful is if we can just settle with that and recognize when we feel like we're in a bit of a mess, that we don't necessarily have to pigeonhole it in any one area. We can just say, hey, that's what I'm feeling right now. And the work ahead is to recover from that. The other part of thinking about burnout is thinking about it in terms of the severity of these symptoms that you have. How severe are they? How low do you feel? And the other thing I share with clients is that the term burnout is again often used indiscriminately to describe people who are just going through a mild sort of decline in their functioning, all the way to more severe conditions. And in the workplace, of course, we talk about being fit for duty or unfit for duty. And, here's where this idea of your mobile phone, your smartphone, battery power, you could kind of think of it as when you're fit for duty, you're at 100% charge, everything's great. When you're in low power mode, you've got that mild impairment, things definitely aren't working properly. And then if you're unfit for duty, of course, you just got to tap out. You need to just take some time off. And speaking of smartphones, the thing what I want to lead in here and just pause for a moment on just this idea of our smartphone itself. If you've got a smartphone, maybe even just place it in your hands for a minute and just bear with me with this. You see, because the smartphone technology, well, look, it's pretty amazing stuff. Multiple different functions, capable of doing lots of things at the same time. It adapts, the screen goes up and down day and night. You can download apps, it can learn things, it gives you feedback, it shares back at you, and it can reset or delete things. Like that's incredible. Again, showing my age now, but certainly when I was a child, the idea you'd have technology like this that everyone would have. It's amazing. And this is a really good analogy, you see, because as human beings, as people, we too are amazing, quite frankly. We have multiple different functions. We can do multiple tasks at the same time. We can adapt, we can learn, we can share, and we can let go of things and reset. And that's the first thing I guess that a lot of my clients start to struggle with when they're in burnout is they don't feel amazing at all. They don't feel amazing at all. But as human beings, we really are amazing. And it's worth pausing on that for a moment if you're going through a rough patch. Because if you take the Latin expression Imago Dei, which is in the Christian, Islamic, and Hindu kind of worldviews of it all, it's trying to say that we're divinely connected beings. We're amazing. We're inspired by God. Uh, Desiderata is a beautiful poem many people are familiar with, and that says, hey, we're actually all children of the universe, and we have the right to be here just as much as the stars and the trees. And of course, the UN Human Rights Charter, all of us are free and equal when we're born. And so take a moment. If me having shared those things with you might sit at odds with where you are right now, then you might need to embrace this fact that you might be actually much more amazing than you're feeling. And I love Marianne Williamson's quote here where she says, well, who am I to be brilliant? I'm sure I certainly can relate in my difficult times. Well, brilliant? I don't think so, Pete. But Marianne then says, well, actually, who are you not to be, Pete? Remember, you're a child of God. You're born to manifest light. All of those points we just covered. You're amazing. All of us are amazing. And so the question then is, okay, I might accept that in good faith, but it's just not how I'm feeling right now. So why don't I feel amazing? And again, this is where our mobile phone becomes so helpful again. It becomes obvious when you think about it in terms of the phone analogy. We're in low power mode or our batteries are flat. And we're not going to feel amazing if we're in low power mode, and certainly not going to feel amazing if our batteries are flat. But also think about it this way. When the phone's battery is low, some of its functionality deactivates. It doesn't work as well. It turns things off. It's called low power mode. And a lot of those symptoms we've just discussed, well, maybe they're actually simply protections. They're things showing us that our battery's too flat. That's something really important to consider because if we are indeed amazing, as I believe all of us are, and then when we don't feel amazing, chances are we've got a temporary battery drain. And we're going to explore that because sometimes that temporary's been going on a long time. And sometimes that temporary's gone from 100 down to zero straight away. And so that leads us to start to think about, well, what causes our batteries to drain? If burnout is about being in this low state of capacity, of having low battery, which I would encourage you to see it that way, we can turn our attention to, well, what's gone on? Why am I like this now? What's happened to drain my battery? And we can stay with our mobile phone analogy. If you've got yours, keep it in your hand, because there are two reasons that phones end up with their battery running out. It's about the background apps that run and data intense events. Background apps, look, I'm sure you're all more familiar than me. My kids always educate me. But if you've got these tracking apps like Facebook, Instagram, and Maps, if they're just going on in the background, you'd have no idea, or I have no idea they're going on, but they're draining out the battery all the while I'm trying to do something else. And then data intense events, major big data things. Well, again, there's certain things that you use your phone for that actually wear it out a lot more, like Roblox and all that sort of stuff. Look, I'm sure you're all over the mobile phone analogy, but it's the perfect one to turn our attention back to ourselves. It actually fits incredibly well with how we understand human psychology. Background apps, well, they're all about our personal vulnerabilities, our tendency towards emotional suppression, unhealthy thinking and behavior, and what we call the little t and big T traumas, how we've adapted to things that have happened in our lives. But on the other side of that are those big data intense events, stressful life events, major health conditions, extreme fatigue. And so at this marker, I just want you to open your mind a little further and say, okay, how might these two areas be draining my battery? What might be going on here? If we sort of just pause on those big ticket events, they're called stressful life events. And that's a really accessible thing for us to consider because there's plenty of actual quizzes and simple documents and lists. This Holmes and Ray list, which we've got on the screen now. Again, for people just listening, it's saying that these 100-point life events are things like the death of a spouse, a divorce, separation, going to jail, a close family member dying, major injuries, all these big ticket things. And they, in their own right, are sufficient to burn us out, no question. We'll have a PDF of the Stressful Life Events quiz sitting in your resources for this module. So if this stuff's resonating for you, go back there, maybe print it out and tick it off. Just get a feel for the level of big events you're carrying right now. That can be really helpful. Some of those events you might have been carrying for quite a long time without realizing just the objective scale of burden that puts upon you. But the other side of this, and perhaps where we'll spend a little more time in this course, is this notion of background apps or our vulnerabilities. And that's back to this idea that sometimes there are things humming along in the background of our lives, just wearing us out. Patterns in our lives that we don't recognize or even perhaps see as abnormal or difficult or unhealthy. They're just part of us. We've been like that forever. But nonetheless, there might be a better way for us to be. And more importantly, those things might be draining us and making it even harder. There's three we're going to just touch in on now. And again, we're trying to just get our thinking going. Could this relate to me or not? The first background app or vulnerability is our tendency towards emotional suppression. Emotional suppression. And that's when we're pushing down, blocking, or denying our feelings like anger and sadness when we feel them. We might have to grin and bear it, grit our teeth, take a deep breath, bite our tongue. All familiar expressions, but all of those highlight the tendency towards emotional suppression. Now, again, my own experience, those of my clients, it's entirely normal to do that and indeed appropriate from time to time in a social setting. But the real problem here is not having a better way to avoid or stop the pattern of emotional suppression. And the big confusion here that we'll cover in this module is that the opposite of emotional suppression is not actually emotional expression. We don't need to act out what's going on inside us for it to come out. What we need to do is do a thing called observation. We need to give permission and notice and allow the internal experience of that emotion rather than block it. We'll resurface on emotional suppression a couple of times through this program. So right now, we just want you to get this idea of grin and bear it, bite your tongue, and also the idea that I don't just have to kind of blow it all out or express it all out for it to be processed. Another personal vulnerability here is this area of unhealthy thinking and behavior patterns. And my PhD and definitely my own journey is all about trying to get on top of thinking patterns. Unhealthy thinking, it's like a distortion field where everything is worse than it is objectively. And that's not to suggest things aren't at times very bad objectively. Indeed, they are. But unhealthy thinking simply makes that worse. You know there's unhealthy thinking going on because you hear things like people should or shouldn't do this and that, and those statements are not in line with, unfortunately, what's actually happening where people are doing things or aren't doing things. Again, just dropping some seeds in there if you find yourself thinking or saying a lot of shoulds and musts. This might be relevant in the roadmap of your burnout and why you're like this. And then behavior patterns. Well, they're the things not that we're thinking, they're the things that we're actually doing. And behavior patterns are key in this as well. But I want you to think about this as avoiding feeling something. So, the classic one most of us experience back to our mobile phone is if we're feeling tense or bored, we play with our phone. And that's an example of distancing away from that feeling of tension or numbing. And then the clinging, staying with the phone, we might start texting people or seeking reassurance more than we normally would. Because what's the emotion we want to avoid? We want to avoid the feeling of loneliness or the feeling of anxiety. And so, if you want to think about behavior patterns that way, think about where we avoid or try to over control something, not because of the thing out there, but as a way of somehow blocking or not needing to accept some really difficult feelings inside. That's what we mean by unhealthy behavior patterns. Look, we're going well. The last thing in our in focus learning, and I want to take my time here with you, is adaptations that we may have made from little t and big T traumas. Now, this one's really important that we develop a bit of a shared understanding about. And so the term traumatic event is a tricky one. In clinical psychology, in the DSM-ICD, the diagnoses that we do, trauma events are what they call big T's, those stressful life events, major things. And we've known about them for years and years and years. But there's increasingly in the literature, Gabor Mate's work, Natalia Rachel, so many. Increasingly, we're seeing just how much these little t traumas and their events, which aren't so dramatic on the outside, but create quite a dramatic conflict with ourselves on the inside, little t traumas. Those things are also really important pivot points when we start to think about, well, how did I get here? Why am I like this? Why am I like this? And it's at this point I want to use just a little illustration to get us to think about this stuff. And so I've got this piece of rope here, knots. I find sometimes I explain it this way. A little t trauma where your like values have been compromised or you sort of feel quite hurt and frustrated by an event, but objectively maybe other people aren't. Well, think about that like a little knot on the rope. And little knots when they get squeezed right down, kind of like a shoelace, you can actually still use the rope. It still actually functions with little knots in it. Not very well, but it does. Big T traumas, excuse me. Big T traumas, on the other hand, well, they're the big knots and they just tie us up. And when you have a big T trauma going on, if you go back to your shoelace idea, this thing doesn't work anymore. It really doesn't function properly at all. And so as you think about your burnout right now, you might want to consider, oh, okay. Yeah, I can start to reflect on this with a whole bunch of things, perhaps that have gone on that might be the little t traumas, the smaller knots. Or, yeah, it makes complete sense right now, Pete. I've got some big T stuff going on. Of course, I need to have time and space to untangle that knot. But the other thing I share sometimes too, which might be relevant for you as you're watching this, is well, what happens when we have multiple little t traumas building up on us? All of these. And so, as you can see in the illustration with a rope with lots of little knots in it, it actually still works again, albeit not very well, because they're all small. But hey, watch this. I'm going to tie yet another knot in this rope full of knots. And I'm sure you're going to guess what happens. And what happens, let me just get that back up on the screen. This is what happens. A big knot. These little knots come together and now we're stuck, hey? Now we're stuck and now we've got to stop. And that one's like the straw that broke the camel's back. Little things built up and I snapped. Well, sometimes what's been happening for you is lots of little t traumas have accrued over time. So let's bring this first bit in focus together. In this section, what we wanted to do was take a look at, well, what causes burnout? What is it? What causes it? And we also wanted to go back to our smartphones and say, hey, I don't feel great right now. And my bad, I'm in low power mode here, but that doesn't mean I don't have the potential for all of this amazing capability. And it certainly doesn't mean I won't have that capability again. The point of this program and the work you're going to do in nurturing yourself and working with other specialists and therapists and your network, the point is you're going to be plugging that cable back in and you're going to be charging yourself back up. And if you can see it that way, then you can start to understand how to charge yourself up. But along the way, changing metaphors, you can untie some of those knots that you've discovered and have a much better way of reconnecting with the world.